Our next lesson we're looking at here in John chapter 1, super long chapter, but we'll keep plugging along here, is John 1:35 all the way to verse 42. So we're looking at 7 verses here. John writes, "The next day John was there again with 2 of his disciples. When he saw Jesus passing by, he said, 'Look, the Lamb of God.' When the 2 disciples heard him say this, they followed Jesus. Turning around, Jesus saw them following and asked, 'What do you want?' They said, 'Rabbi,' which means teacher, 'where are you staying?' 'Come,' he replied, 'and you will see.' So they went and saw where he was staying and spent that day with him. It was about the 10th hour. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the 2 who heard what Jesus had said and who had followed Jesus. The first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon and tell him, 'We have found the Messiah,' that is, the Christ, and he brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, 'You are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas,' which then is translated as Peter." Really simple message here in this call narrative. These are called call narratives, or Jesus calling the disciples. They're found all throughout Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So these are pretty common to each gospel. When Jesus calls different disciples, we hear the calling of Matthew. We hear the calling of Peter is probably the most common. And the one thing to learn here is just one thing to learn in these particular narratives. Narrative is just a fancy word for story. One thing to learn in these particular stories is how the disciples responded after Jesus called them. Jesus basically called them, follow him. What they do? What did these disciples do? How did they respond? They dropped everything and followed him. They essentially left behind their old life and totally adapted a new way of living. It's a very radical idea that Jesus, when he calls his Christians, says, "What I want you to do is I want you to give up selfishness. I want you to give up always thinking about crude ways to make people laugh. I want you to think about giving up gossip." Sorry, it's really late at night. I want you to think about giving up gossip. I want you to think about just giving up living for yourself and money and materialism and trying to get so much stuff and envy and bitterness and hatred and lack of forgiving. Jesus, I want you to give all that up. I want you to think a new way of living. A way where your heart, first thing in the morning, gets up and says, "Wow, how can I be a blessing for God?" A way where your mind says, "What can I do with my resources, my words, my talents, my time to give back to the kingdom of heaven?" A way where your life and your checkbook is not always focused on yourself, but focused on Jesus Christ. And one of the problems I have with a lot of us today is we say we're disciples, we say we're followers, but we're still living in this old life. We haven't given that up. The disciples, Andrew, James, Peter, John, Philip, Nathaniel, all these guys had normal lives. They were fishermen, they were carpenters, they did all this stuff, tax collectors. But they gave all that up because they had a new way of living found in Jesus Christ. It's not to say at all that you have to give up watching television or going to the movies or hang out with friends. But what this is to say is that your life no longer revolves around that stuff, but your life now revolves in a new direction. It revolves around Jesus Christ. And a good way to test that is, what are your conversations revolve around? What are your ideas? What are your thoughts? What does your checkbook reflect? And that will really determine whether or not you are truly involved in Jesus Christ. You're in the game. Or you're just someone who's sitting on the sidelines. We have far too many Christians who sit on the sidelines who say, "Yeah, I'm doing it," with their mouth, but their lives deny it. We need way more Christians who say, "I'm going to be involved in the game. My life, my heart, my resources are going to show that I am a disciple for Jesus Christ." We need far less Christians who are currently American Christians who just on the sideline. We need far more Christians who say, "I can still keep some of what's going on, but my life is primarily going to be focused in Jesus Christ. I have to give up the sinful ways of the past. I might be able to keep some friends and maybe a couple hobbies. I can still keep playing sports and doing all that stuff, but I have to primarily focus my life, my gifts, my talents, and use those to glorify God." That's our charge tonight. It's a really simple concept, but that is what we're called to be when we say we're disciples of Jesus Christ.